The dragon and the machines, they came from the stars like a plague of silver locusts, their ships blotting out the sun with holes that gleamed like mirror-bright tombstones. The Kethmori had conquered 17 systems before they found Earth, and in each one, they had faced the fiercest predators that evolution could devise. The crystalline hunters of Vex Prime with their diamond claws. The shadow weavers of the nebula rings, who could bend light itself. The quantum wasps of the helix worlds that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, yet none had prepared them for what they found in the mountains of this small blue world. The dragon was ancient when the first human learned to make fire. Old when the pyramids were young. It had watched civilizations rise and fall from its lair in the volcanic peaks, a creature of such primal majesty that even the bravest knights had approached it with prayers on their lips and wills written in trembling hands. Its scales were like molten iron, cooled to obsidian hardness, each one the size of a warrior's shield. When it spread its wings, valleys fell into shadow, and the sound was like thunder rolling across the heavens. Its eyes burned with an intelligence older than recorded history, and when it breathed, mountains trembled. To the Kethmori, it represented everything they had come to expect from conquest, a symbol of raw, uncontrolled power that needed to be harnessed, broken, and bent to their will. They saw not a majestic creature with its own ancient wisdom, but merely another biological weapon to be cataloged, processed, and repurposed for their endless war machine. Commander Zethkar, whose exoskeleton bore the acid-scarred trophies of a dozen worlds, stood at the edge of the dragon's domain with calculating eyes. Magnificent, he hissed through his translator, the word twisted into something cold and clinical. The bio readings are extraordinary. Neural complexity off our charts. If we can break its will, redirect its aggression patterns, it will make the perfect shock trooper for the Outer Rim campaigns. They brought everything. Plasma chains forged in the heart of dying stars, each link humming with enough energy to power a small city. Neural disruptors that could scramble the thoughts of creatures whose brains spanned continents. Gravity wells that could pin a mountain to the ground. Sonic scramblers that had driven the pack hunters of Zarian 7 insane within minutes. The first assault was meant to be overwhelming, decisive. A show of such technological superiority that the beast would surrender immediately, recognizing the futility of resistance. The plasma chains shot out like luminous serpents, wrapping around the dragon's limbs with bindings of pure energy. The neural disruptors fired in synchronous waves, designed to flood the creature's mind with confusion and compliance commands, but the dragon was not cowed. It was incensed. The roar that erupted from its throat was not just sound. It was the voice of the earth itself, of tectonic plates grinding and volcanoes being born. The plasma chains, supposedly unbreakable, began to crack under the sheer force of the dragon's rage, where they touched its scales. Steam rose in great billowing clouds, but the scales held firm, blackened but unbroken. The dragon's wings beat once, twice, and the Kethmori ground vehicles were sent tumbling like toys in a hurricane. Ancient muscles, evolved for flight and strengthened by millennia of survival, strained against the energy bonds. And slowly, impossibly, the chains began to give way. Increase power to maximum, Zethkar commanded, his voice tight with something approaching panic. No creature had ever resisted their initial subjugation protocols. Their technology was the refined product of 1,000 conquered worlds, each defeat teaching them new methods of control. The neural collars came next, crown-like devices that pulsed with invasive energy, designed to bypass the creature's natural mental defenses and implant direct command pathways. They fired like harpoons, seeking to attach to the dragon's skull and spine. But the creature's hide was too thick, its scales too well armored. The devices bounced off like raindrops against stone, their delicate circuitry sparking and dying against surfaces that had weathered meteorites and magma flows. Hour after hour, the aliens brought new weapons to bear. Sonic harpoons that should have disrupted the dragon's inner ear and destroyed its balance. Electromagnetic pulse devices that had reduced the living computers of Altera Beta to drooling husks. Pheromone clouds designed to trigger submission responses, the most aggressive species they had encountered. Nothing worked. The dragon fought with the fury of a force of nature. Each failed attempt to subdue it only seemed to increase its rage. It breathed fire that melted their most heat-resistant alloys. Its claws, long as spears and sharp as surgical lasers, tore through their energy barriers as if they were made of paper. When it roared, their sound dampeners overloaded and burst, leaving the alien soldiers deaf and disoriented. But it was more than just the failure of their technology that unnerved the Kethmori. It was the look in the dragon's eyes. They had broken the spirits of countless creatures across the galaxy, had seen the moment when defiance turned to despair, when proud hunters became obedient tools. They knew the exact instant when a creature's will finally shattered. That moment never came with the dragon. Instead, they saw something they had forgotten existed: absolute, uncompromising freedom. The dragon fought not just against their chains and collars, but against the very concept of subjugation. Every scale on its body seemed to reject the idea of servitude. Its fire burned not with random animal fury, but with purposeful, intelligent resistance. Day turned to night, and still the battle raged. The dragon's cave became a fortress of melted metal and shattered dreams. The aliens' most sophisticated equipment lay in ruins around the creature's feet, sparking and smoking like the remnants of failed ambitions. The humans watching from their hidden villages saw it all. They saw their ancient guardian, standing defiant against the invaders from the stars. They saw the last wild heart beating strong against the cold, mechanical pulse of conquest. Children pressed against windows, watching in awe as the dragon's fire painted the night sky in shades of gold and crimson. Old storytellers whispered that this was how the world would end or be reborn, not with surrender, but with the roar of something that refused to be tamed. And in that darkness, as sparks fell like dying stars and the dragon's wings cast shadows across the valley, the aliens began to understand that they had encountered something beyond their experience, a spirit that could not be broken by any machine. No matter how advanced, no matter how powerful, the dragon would not yield. And in its refusal, it became more than a creature. It became a symbol of everything the technology could not touch, could not measure, could not control. The woman with the string dar. Elena Vasquez had never intended to become humanity's last hope. She was a cultural anthropologist, quiet academic whose greatest adventures usually involved dusty archives and long conversations with elderly storytellers in remote villages. Her hands were soft from years of handling delicate artifacts and ancient texts, not weapons. Her voice was gentle from coaxing shy children to share their folklore, not commanding armies. But when the world's greatest military minds had failed, when every scientist's solution had crumbled to ash and smoke, when the dragon's rage had reduced the aliens' technology to twisted metal sculptures, she found herself walking toward the cave that had become a monument to defiance. The path was littered with the debris of failed conquest. Pieces of alien technology, still warm and sparking, lay scattered like the bones of some great mechanical beast. The air shimmered with residual energy fields and tasted of ozone and burnt metal. Every step took her deeper into what had become a graveyard of the Kethmori's certainty. She had studied dragons, not as the mythical beasts that haunted fairy tales, but as the cultural touchstones they represented across human civilization. In every culture, in every corner of the world where humans had learned to speak and dream, dragons appeared. Sometimes as destroyers, sometimes as guardians, but always as representations of the wild, untamable forces that existed beyond human control. The Kethmori commanders watched her approach with a kind of bewildered disdain reserved for the clearly insane. Commander Zethkar's translator crackled with static as he spoke, his voice filled with the exhaustion of defeat temporarily held at bay. Human, female, you approach the creature unarmed. Your military leaders have confirmed this is suicide. Elena paused, adjusting her simple canvas pack with steady hands. Inside was her life's work, not weapons or technological marvels, but the collected wisdom of human connection. Children's games from 6 continents, string figures that told stories older than written language, Simple tools that had crossed cultural barriers for thousands of years. "Your pardon, Commander," she said, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had spent years earning the trust of suspicious strangers. "But I don't believe it's suicide. I believe it's conversation." The alien's exoskeleton clicked in what she had learned too, recognizes their equivalent of derisive laughter. Conversation. With a creature that has destroyed 17 war machines and incinerated our most advanced neural interface systems, your species continues to astonish with its capacity for delusion. But Alina was already walking past him, past the ranks of battered soldiers and smoking machinery, toward the mouth of the cave where the dragon waited. She had read every account of the battles, studied the recorded interactions, analyzed the pattern of the creature's responses. What everyone else saw as mindless fury, she recognized as something else entirely: communication. The dragon wasn't simply attacking. It was responding. Every new attempt at subjugation brought a precisely calibrated escalation. When they used restraints, it broke them with exactly the force necessary. Never more, never less. When they tried neural manipulation, it responded with mental displays of power that overwhelmed their systems without destroying them entirely. It was like watching someone engaged in a very complex, very dangerous argument. The cave mouth yawned before her. Carved from living rock by claws and fire over countless centuries, the heat radiating from within was intense but not unbearable, another sign that the dragon was controlling itself, measuring its responses. If it had wanted to kill everything in a mile radius, the temperature alone would have been lethal. She stepped into the dragon's domain. The cavern was vast, its walls polished to mere smoothness by centuries of the dragon's presence. Crystalline formations caught and reflected the light from the creature's internal fire, creating a cathedral of living flame and shadow. And there, in the center of it all, was the dragon itself. It was even more magnificent up close. Each scale was a masterwork of natural engineering, each movement a study in controlled power. But it was the eyes that stopped her breath, ancient beyond measure, but sharp with an intelligence that had watched civilizations rise and fall, that had learned the patterns of human nature through centuries of careful observation. The dragon's head, massive as a house, turned toward her with deliberate slowness. Its nostrils flared, scenting her. She could feel the heat of its breath on her face, could see the fire building in its throat. One word from it, and she would be nothing but ash in memory. Instead, it waited. Alina slowly lowered her pack to the ground, her movements careful and deliberate. The dragon's eyes tracked every gesture. She reached inside and withdrew her most precious tool, a simple piece of string, about 3 feet long, made from plant fibers by her grandmother when Alina was a child. The Kethmori, watching through their sensors from a safe distance, could only stare in incomprehension. Their most advanced weapons had failed. Their technology, refined across 1,000 worlds of conquest, had proven useless. And this human female thought string would succeed where plasma and neural disruptors had failed. But Alina wasn't thinking about success or failure. She was thinking about connection. She held up the string, letting it catch the light from the dragon's inner fire. Her grandmother had taught her this, had shown her how the simple loop could become a bridge between strangers, how the ancient patterns could speak across language barriers and cultural divides. "Cat's cradle," she said softly, her voice carrying clearly in the cathedral silence of the cave. "Do you know this game?" The dragon's massive head tilted slightly, and Alina felt her heart skip. It was such a human gesture, so familiar and unexpected in a creature of such immense scale. Curiosity, the same expression she had seen on the faces of children around the world when she introduced them to the string figures there. Grandparents had known. She began the opening pattern, her fingers moving with the practiced ease of years. The string formed a simple geometric shape between her hands, the first position in a game that was older than recorded history, that had been played by children when the pyramids were young. When the dragon itself was learning to fly, the dragon leaned forward slightly, its enormous eyes focusing on the small pattern of string and shadow dancing between her fingers. For a moment, the cave was perfectly still, except for the soft whisper of her movements and the deep, slow rhythm of the dragon's breathing. Then she made the next transition, pulling new patterns from the old, transforming the simple geometry into something more complex. The string became a star, then a house, then a butterfly poised for flight. Each transformation was a small magic, a demonstration of how something simple could become something beautiful with just the right touch. The dragon's breathing deepened, and Alina realized it was no longer the rhythm of potential violence. It was the steady, focused breathing of rapt attention. She looked up from the string to meet those ancient eyes directly. "Would you like to try?" The question hung in the air like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Behind her, she could hear the confused chatter of alien voices, the clicking of weapons being readied for what they assumed would be her inevitable death. They could not comprehend what they were witnessing the moment when force gave way to invitation. When conquest was replaced by play, the dragon's great head came down slowly, carefully, until its snout was mere inches from her hands. Its breath was warm and steady, smelling of deep earth and distant fire. And then, with delicacy that would have shamed a master craftsman, it extended one enormous claw toward the string. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands remained steady. She had spent her life learning to read the subtle language of trust and fear, and she could see that the dragon was as nervous as she was. This was uncharted territory for both of them. The claw, sharp enough to slice through steel, touched the string with butterfly gentleness. The dragon's eyes widened, slightly surprised, perhaps at the softness of the fiber against its armored skin. Alina smiled and began to guide its movements, showing it how to hold the pattern, how to become part of the ancient game. It was clumsy at first, its movements too large for such delicate work. But dragons, Alina realized, were excellent learners. Within minutes, it had adapted. Using just the tip of its claw to manipulate the string with increasing confidence, the cave filled with a strange new sound. Something between a purr and a rumble, deep and resonant. It took Alina a moment to recognize it as laughter. The dragon was enjoying itself. They played for an hour, maybe two. Time lost its meaning in the warm glow of the cave as they passed the string back and forth, creating patterns that had never existed before, collaborations between human fingers and dragon claws that would have been impossible to imagine. Just hours earlier, the dragon's laughter grew more frequent, more confident. It began to experiment, creating variations on the traditional patterns, adding its own improvisations to the ancient game. Alina found herself laughing too, delighted by the creature's creativity and obvious joy. When the dragon finally lowered its great head to rest near her feet, Alina felt something shift in the very air around them. The tension that had filled the cave like a held breath suddenly released. The dragon's fire dimmed to a warm glow. It's no longer a weapon held ready, but a hearthlight shared between friends. She reached out slowly and placed her hand on the warm scales of the dragon's snout. The creature's eyes closed, and she felt the deep rumble of contentment that shook the entire cave. Outside, the aliens stood in stunned silence. Their instruments registered the change in the dragon's bio-readings, stress hormones dropping to baseline levels, neural patterns shifting from aggression to calm alertness. But they could not understand what they were seeing. Alina understood, though. She understood that she had not tamed the dragon that would have been impossible, and more importantly, wrong. Instead, she had offered it something that all the technology in the galaxy could not provide. Recognition, respect, the simple acknowledgement that it was not a problem to be solved or a weapon to be claimed, but a being worthy of connection. The string lay between them now. A simple loop of plant fiber that had become something far more precious, a symbol of the bridge that could exist between even the most different of souls. When one was willing to approach with open hands and an open heart, the lesson and the legacy, the aftermath, of what the human media would later call the dragon. A chord rippled through both species with the force of a cultural earthquake. For the Kethmori, who had built their civilization on the certainty of technological superiority, Elena's success with a piece of string represented a fundamental challenge to everything they thought they understood about power, control, and conquest. Commander Zethkar stood in his command center. his exoskeleton's sensors still displaying the impossible data from the cave. The dragon's aggression markers had flatlined. Its stress indicators showed levels typically associated with deep meditation. Most confounding of all, its neural patterns now displayed what could only be described as contentment. A creature that had resisted their most sophisticated weapons with the fury of a natural disaster was now exhibiting bio-readings consistent with ... happiness. Explain. This he demanded of his science division, his voice carrying harmonics of frustrated bewilderment. 17 standard units of concentrated assault? Neural disruptors calibrated to break the will of creatures with brain masses exceeding planetary norms. Plasma restraints tested on the warbeasts of 7 systems. All failed. A single human with plant fiber succeeds. Your analysis. Dr. Cathera, the expedition's xenobiologist, manipulated her data displays with nervous clicks. Her own certainties had crumbled along with their technology. Commander, initial theories suggested the human female possessed some form of psionic capability. Deep scans negative. No enhanced neural activity. No biotechnological augmentation. Genetic markers consistent with baseline human parameters. Then how? The question carried the weight of an empire's confusion. The answer came from an unexpected source, Subcommander Veclin, junior officer, whose specialty was cultural analysis rather than weapons. He had been studying human civilizations as potential resistance vectors, learning their weaknesses for more efficient subjugation. Instead, he had discovered something that none of their previous conquests had prepared them for. Commander. Veclin's voice carried the careful tone of someone about to challenge fundamental assumptions. I believe we have been operating under a critical misunderstanding of human behavioral patterns. Zethkar. S. Exoskeleton shifted to face him directly. Explain. In every system we have conquered, resistance has been predicated on strength meeting strength. The Crystal Hunters fought with their diamond claws until they broke. The Shadow Weavers used their light bending until we adapted. Even the Quantum Wasps exhausted their dimensional capabilities against our containment fields. They all eventually reached the limits of their power and submitted. Obviously. Standard conquest protocols are based on this principle. But humans appear to operate on different parameters entirely. Veclin's analysis display showed patterns that had puzzled him for months. When faced with superior force, they often respond not with greater force, but with alternative approaches. They call it thinking outside the box. This string manipulation appears to be an extreme example of this tendency. Zethkar's translator crackled with static as he processed this. You suggest that instead of engaging with our technological superiority, the humans simply ignored it? More than that, Commander. She redefined the entire interaction. Where we saw a subjugation scenario, she created a social scenario. The dragon responded not as a creature being dominated, but as a being befriended. The concept was so alien to Kethmori, thinking that several officers needed their translators recalibrated. Their language had dozens of words for different types of conquest, subjugation, and control. It had exactly one word for friendship, and it was considered a term used only for describing the relationships between tools. Meanwhile, in the dragon's cave, Alina was learning that her success had created complications she had never anticipated. The dragon who had introduced himself through a series of rumbles, clicks, and thermal displays that she interpreted as something like, Ancient Fire, who remembers the first stars, was eager to continue their games. But he was also curious about her world, her species, and the strange visitors who had tried to chain him. The string games had evolved into something more complex. The dragon had proven remarkably adept at learning human sign language. His massive claws surprisingly delicate when forming the gestures. In return, he taught Alina the meaning behind his own complex. Vocalization's a language of harmonics, and subsonic pulses that carried information about everything, from weather patterns to the emotional states of creatures miles away. Your small builders are strange, he communicated using his term for humans. The dragon's languages was conceptual rather than literal, building meaning through layered imagery. They create tools that think, but the tools that think cannot play. Alina smiled, still amazed at how easily conversation had developed between them. The aliens? They don't understand play the way we do. For them, everything is about winning or losing, controlling or being controlled. The dragon's massive head tilted, and what she had learned was his expression of confusion. But without play, how do they learn the shape of each other's hearts? How do they know who can be trusted when the storms come? It was a profound question, and Alina realized it cut to the heart of what had happened. The Kethmori had approached the dragon as a problem to be solved, a resource to be exploited. They had never considered the possibility of simply getting to know him. Over the following weeks, as news of the Accord spread across both human and alien networks, Alina found herself at the center of a transformation that went far beyond a single friendship. The dragon, who began to venture from his cave for the first time in centuries, became a bridge between species. His ancient wisdom and Alina's cultural knowledge created a dialogue that challenged its fundamental assumptions on both sides. Human children, initially terrified of the great beast, were won over within hours by his patient participation in their games. The dragon learned hopscotch, hide and seek, and dozens of other activities that required no technology, no weapons, no displays of dominance, only imagination and the willingness to be silly together. The Kethmori, observing these interactions through their sensors, struggled to categorize what they were seeing. Their behavioral analysis programs had no frameworks for processing activities that served no apparent survival function. When human children laughed while playing tag with a creature that could incinerate city blocks, their computers reported system errors, but some individual aliens began to show curiosity. Subcommander Fecklin requested permission to observe the interactions more closely. Dr. Kithara submitted reports that grew increasingly puzzled and fascinated. Even Commander Zethkar found himself studying the recordings with something approaching wonder. The breakthrough came when Alina introduced the dragon to a group of human artists-musicians, painters, storytellers who had heard about the remarkable friendship and wanted to contribute to the growing cultural exchange. The dragon, it turned out, was deeply moved by music. His own vocalizations, when harmonized with human instruments, created sounds of such beauty that even the aliens' cold sensors registered them as aesthetically significant. During one evening performance, as the dragon's bass harmonies blended with a human choir singing an ancient folk song about friendship overcoming fear, several Kethmori officers found themselves removing their helmets to better hear the sound. It was the first time in their military history that they had prioritized aesthetic experience over tactical awareness. The moment was captured by human journalists and broadcast across the galaxy. The image of armored alien warriors setting aside their weapons to listen to music created by humans and a dragon became a symbol of its possibility that reached into star systems the Kethmori had not yet conquered. Resistance movements on occupied worlds saw the broadcasts and began to understand that the seemingly invincible aliens were not immune to approaches they had never considered. Instead of meeting force with force, some communities began to respond with art, with games, with invitations to participate in activities that had no winners or losers, only shared experiences. The effects rippled through Kethmori society as well. Soldiers who had never questioned their mission began to ask why conquest was necessary if connection was possible. Scientists who had spent careers developing better weapons started studying human recreational mathematics, Zen gardens, and the therapeutic effects of collaborative storytelling. Alina, watching all this unfold from her position as accidental ambassador, realized that she and the dragon had started something far larger than either of them had intended. The string that had first connected them had become the first thread in a tapestry of understanding that was growing too. To encompass entire civilizations, the dragon, for his part, seemed to understand the significance of what they had begun. Small builder Alina, he communicated one evening as they watched the sunset from a moon mountainside, where children of both species played together in the golden light. You have taught the star travelers that there are more ways to touch the world than with claws and fire weapons. Alina smiled, her fingers automatically forming the opening pattern of cat's cradle, a gesture that had become their traditional greeting. We taught each other, old friend. That's what play does. It shows us that we're not as different as we think we are. The dragon's laughter rumbled through the mountains, and human children looked up from their games to wave at him. In the distance, a Kethmori scout ship landed gently instead of crashing down with usual aggressive displays. 3 alien officers emerged, their weapons holstered, carrying what appeared to be musical instruments. Alina and the dragon exchanged a look of shared amusement. The galaxy was learning to play. The story of the woman who tamed a dragon with strings spread to become legend. But those who understood it best knew that taming was the wrong word entirely. Alina had not conquered the dragon's wildness, she had joined it. She had not forced it to become something else. She had discovered what it truly was beneath the fear and fury. A being capable of joy, curiosity, and friendship. And in learning that lesson, 2 species had begun to discover that the universe was far larger and more wonderful than either had imagined. When they were focused only on conquest and control, the string lay in Elena's pocket now, carried wherever she went as ambassador between worlds. Sometimes she would take it out during particularly difficult negotiations. And the simple gesture of forming the ancient patterns would remind everyone present that the most powerful technology in the universe was not made of metal or energy, but of the connections that could form between any 2 beings willing to meet each other with open hearts. Because in the end, while the aliens had brought technology capable of destroying worlds, it was the human heart, patient, playful, and endlessly curious about others, that had brought wonder to the stars and won the loyalty of the last dragon forever.